we need to cover, or at least acknowledge, is that a lot of people here will be wondering why they were getting invites and connection requests from BIM for Housing. That will be explained. There's a very good reason for that, and we'll come to that shortly. I just want to give a quick overview on BIM for Housing. It's been going for a few years now, a good few years now. They used to meet, have a speaker, a beer and something to eat, ask a few questions, and it was all very nice. Then 2.5 years later, 2.5 years ago, George Stevenson took over and totally changed the methodology and the aims of BIM for Housing. It's now very much delivery focused. We're not a talking shop. We have significant outputs, and that's what we aim at, that each meeting produces something at the end of it, even if it's only partial and has to be completed in subsequent meetings. I don't know if you're aware, BIM for Housing was mentioned by Dame Judith Hackett in her report. And when the department was looking for industry input onto the Golden Thread, George was actually asked to lead the Asset and Survey Information Working Group. We ran dozens of workshops with specialists, subject matter experts, the like, and we continue to provide feedback. In fact, just a few months ago, we had a big meeting, about 150, 200 people attended, where we had as the guest answering questions one of the advisors to the Levelling Up Committee. So that was it was obviously very valuable, and we have output from that, which I'll come on to now. Just a bit of housekeeping. If you're a bit shy to speak, or you want to make a point, put it into the chat. This meeting is recorded, and after the meeting, we make available the recording and also high point notes of what's happened during the meeting. Now, that will include the chat, so please do use the chat. Now, I'm just going to quickly whiz onto the BIM for Housing website, if I can find where to share. If I can just share, and I'll show you just a couple of things on the BIM for Housing website. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Yep.
Right, this is our design working group. We have 6 working groups. This is the design working group, just as an example. You can see we've got, for all our meetings, meeting notes and meeting videos. So they're all available. We've actually got on here, getting on for 200 1.5-hour meetings. So that in and of itself is quite a resource. If I just go back here, this is our events. This is one we held just a couple of weeks ago. Again, the videos and the high points. Okay, let me stop sharing. There we go. Most recently, we've been getting our heads around the new responsibility of the principal designer and exploring that with people who actually have that responsibility. Okay, I keep mentioning George. That's George Stevenson. He's the chairman of BIM for Housing and CEO of Activeplan. Activeplan have actually been sponsoring a lot of BIM for Housing activity, and I'm hoping they're going to continue with that, with this initiative, wherever this meeting decides it's going to go. So, George, do you want to put a bit more flesh on the bones of what I've just said?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for everybody attending. If I share my screen. So, just put a little bit more meat on the bone of what Richard said. I took over about 4 years ago, and basically, I basically recalibrated what BIM for Housing was doing, because a lot of it was around 3D modeling, which is great, but I'm particularly interested in asset information management. And to be frank, that's what BIM was really put in place to do as far as the government's concerned. So we focused on the information side of things rather than the software. And we set up 6 working groups to look at each of the different elements of the life cycle, and really use that to for each of those working groups to identify how things could be improved by better information. And they concluded that there was things that needed to be done, and therefore essentially a couple of people from each of the working groups formed a work stream to tackle certain topics. And one of them, for example, fire doors. Alan Oliver's with us this morning, where we've worked collaboratively to produce a standardised fire door inspection regime. So we had a data work stream where we came up with standardised data templates and standardised information requirements. A lot of stuff around classification and processes. Fire safety has been huge. As Richard said, we've had probably well over 100 meetings on fire safety. We've actually produced detailed information sets on 12 fire safety critical assets. We've also started, we helped start Zero, which is around sustainability and carbon, and also digital records. So the purpose of this really is to try and find ways across the different activities and disciplines and interest groups to get people working in a more joined up way. Part of that, as Richard said, I was asked to lead the Golden Thread Initiative Asset Group, and there was other groups doing different elements, and this is all part of the Golden Thread. And then we ran various different Teams workshops and also some in-person ones like this one at Excel. So that, for example, there'd be a design working group, manufacturers around that table there. This one here, these are all in the construction sector. They're in operations. And the purpose of that, we gave them real life scenarios to share their knowledge. The idea of these workshops is to actually bring together people who may actually be competitors, but they've got similar problems, and by bringing them together, they without the commercial drivers, as it were, they're able to share experiences and share solutions. So, for example, here, this came from Mace. So this is some student accommodation where the scenario is that a fire breaks out in the kitchen, and then the question is, what measures are in place to protect the residents and also the firefighters? So, for example, compartmentation. The important point about this that the HSE have made is that it's great if you've got good fire doors, and but if the penetration seals, the fire stopping doesn't work, then actually you've got to they all need to be 100% really, and then you've got smoke control and detection. So all of those systems need to be in place. So we started to look at what information do we need to know, for example, about the compartment walls to ensure that it's going to be a safe building. And that then led into the gateways. Now, the gateways are principally for high risk or high rise buildings, but it feeds into the fire safety orders, and the amendments to building regs, which obviously is impacting on everything now. So that's the sort of process that we're actually following through, and to be able to get certification at the different gateways, you have to now be able to demonstrate that you've got that digital record of what's been done. What we've tried to do is identify what the essential digital asset information is, and in a simple way of looking at it is what asset types were specified. Did the products that were chosen meet the specification? Where were they installed? Who installed them? Was it done properly? Who inspected them? What product was used? And if manufacturer's test evidence is needed, where is it? And then when will it need replacing? So those are the key things that obviously, most asset managers would find very helpful, useful, essential, really, to manage going forward. And it's having that as an auditable digital record that now is part of the legislation. We've then drilled into a bit more detail to say what products are important from that perspective, because you can't have the detail on everything, but these are the things that are in building regulations. And the building regulation is obviously where things are, that's where the legislation comes in. And then Regulation 38, which obviously covers the fire safety side of things, that's coming under much more scrutiny. So, for example, you need an as-built plan of the building. Now, that may be obvious, but certainly we come across lots of buildings, existing buildings, where there isn't an as-built plan. You're lucky if you get design drawings. And then we've then drilled into a bit more detail and said what information's needed for compartmentation, for example, or the other things. This is regulation or proof document B of the building regs. And there's all sorts of things coming through now with carbon as well. But if we just look at the safety side of things, this is what's legally required. And then there was a revision in August where, although that Regulation 38 stuff's been around for a long time, what now has happened is that the legislation has been changed, or it's been added to say that the responsible person, which is probably the client, has got to confirm that they have all of the necessary information to understand, operate, and maintain the building and its fire safety systems effectively after building work. Now, in my experience of going through O&Ms, both existing O&Ms and O&Ms that come through on new projects, that information seldom is actually provided. But under the new legislation, if a trust, for example, doesn't, if they don't sign that off, they won't get building control approval. If they sign it off and they've not got it, then basically they're committing a criminal offence. So this is quite a substantial thing, really. And then on the other end of it, the principal designer and principal contractor, and this, I'm reliably informed that this could be a ward fit out, for example. So this isn't just about new build. So it could be anything where there's more than one contractor engaged and they're doing things that could impact on safety. There needs to be a principal designer and a principal contractor, and they need to confirm that they've provided all of the information necessary, and also that they've had notice from the responsible person acknowledging that they've had it all. Now, I can't see how that's going to work unless people are much clearer in terms of what information's needed. So we've been doing some digging through, and we've got a number of subject matter experts that are involved in this that are helping us. This is an example. This is a residential block that we've been doing as active plan, doing an audit of handover. So what we've done is, in quite a sort of systematic, methodical way, is go through the information that's handed over as the health and safety file and the O&Ms to see if the information that was needed has been provided. Now, not surprisingly, the stuff that was needed for building control has actually been there. But then as you drill into the detail, you can see that there's missing information. There's not good information on quite a lot of the key assets there, which are the assets that are mentioned in from a safety perspective.
Is that the red ones, George?
Yeah, the red ones, that's the missing ones. Yeah, absolutely, yes. And then when we're then drilling into the detail, there's also comments and things that need to be picked up. But this is the Regulation 38 example, which is shocking, but not surprising. The client wasn't at all amazed that they didn't have this information, but this is now something that's going to be audited. So I guess my question really, this is we obviously work with Equans and Sodexo and other FM companies on projects, and we know how many changes and projects you're having to deal with. And one of the things I wanted to just understand is, how do you see the new building regs affecting you? Is that something that's on your radar? Who is the responsible person? And what are they responsible for? I was talking with one of our clients the other day, and they were saying that on this hospital, they've got 3 different fire risk assessments done by different parties, because the trust will have one, they will have one because they're the FM, and there's also what's the situation with the retained estate, who's responsible for that, is the SPV also engaged in that as well. So what are they responsible for? What information do they need to provide to people that are carrying out work? And also, what information do they need to collect? Is that really, are you on top of that? And the big one at the moment is competence. That's me now, Richard.
Right. Does somebody want to come in on this, and we'll start delving into these questions? Just one little thing I want to just quickly mention is culture. We developed an environment whereby competitors will sit in the same video call and share to the benefit of everyone. It's also an environment where a cat can look at a king. The MD of a significant company can be sitting figuratively next to the guy who's installing a fire door. And they're all equal, and we get the view from the coalface and we get the view from the boardroom. So everybody here, whatever your position or whatever your commercial position, everybody's the same, and we want to hear from all of you. So do you want, George, can you put your questions back, and we'll see if anybody can chip into some of those. Okay, well, the first one, how do you see the new building regulations affecting you? Does somebody want to come in on that, or should I pick on someone? Daniel, it's you. You're on mute.
Yeah, I guess.
Do you want to explain where you're from, Daniel?
Oh, sure, of course. Sorry. Forget there's some folks. Anyway, yeah, so I'm Daniel O'Dowd, Senior BIM Manager and Global BIM Skills Lead at Arup. For the past wee while now, I've been kind of helping develop standardized properties, workflows, ways of working, and kind of improving the collaborative process for fire safety and BIM with ourselves and other kind of folk we're working with. I guess really that work is kind of integral to what we're kind of talking about here today in terms of collaboration and creating that kind of culture. Because I think that like it's great that we've got the culture here within the working group, but I also think that like once we step back out of the working group into, you know, quote unquote the real world, things can be a little less collaborative, you might say. And I think, you know, what I've found successful is actually talking about what the responsibilities are in terms of getting that to work is making sure that everybody's aware of what their responsibilities are when you put new things like fire safety into the mix. I mean, it should be in the mix already, but I suppose let me give you an example. Right now, I suppose the main thing you even touched on it there actually in the beginning is that you know, people think of BIM as like 3D models, and so it's a good place to start with people normally. Then you've got the structured data that lives inside that 3D model, and at the moment, in terms of the granularity, we divide up the responsibility based upon elements. So let's just say I'm the architect, I own the walls, therefore I own every single property to do with the wall. Now, even just saying that out loud, you kind of immediately see that it doesn't really make sense for that to happen. And really what there ought to be is a finer grain granularity in that sort of ability to divide up responsibilities. Technologically, it's like it's almost quite frustrating because we're like almost there, but we don't quite have anything that does the whole package yet. So what we do is we usually kind of agree a set of I'll call them parameters because let's face it, we mostly work in Revit these days, but properties or IFC or Building Smart Data Dictionary would also work. We agree that, and we agree it for the whole project, for its entirety, and that way we can actually, you know, even though we kind of at the moment have to agree that the fire safety team will remain responsible for their part and the architect for their part, because, like I said, contractually and technologically we're not quite there in terms of dividing that properly. The fire safety team actually is able to kind of transfer across some of that requirement information, you know, so turning some of that information in reports into structured data is something that kind of, you know, we've been able to achieve in Arup anyway. And we found that that's really, we found it's really good actually, because you know, if we can set things up right, and it does take a bit of working, what we try and do is make sure that the fire safety team doesn't get any more than they signed up for, any more work than they signed up for. But the result that I find is usually that coordination of that information across the project is made more efficient. So it ends up kind of saving everybody time.
So you've got the processes set up, and
yeah.
you're quite fairly happy with where you are.
I mean, that's one of those things. You're never quite happy with where you are you? But yeah, I think it's going well. I would say that it's going really well. I would 99% of the folk that we have worked with have, you know, even external persons have kind of said, you know, been happy to get on board. Because this is, you know, in the beginning, we mainly target structural engineering and architecture because the thing that people get mostly is the visual stuff, and the visual stuff is mostly compartmentation. There's far more data within that kind of let you know, the real use of the BIM.
Sure.
You know, there's far more
Yeah.
data in there that can be structured. But at the moment, we're kind of pushing early stages. We're kind of making sure that people are comfortable and kind of getting it through. Because of course, there's like lots of other information. So
George,
I think,
do you want to come in on
well,
that?
yeah.
What I'd like to know is there somebody from Equans or Sodexo that could just give us your take on things at the moment? Hello, Caroline.
Hi there. So my name is Caroline. I'm an asset manager with Sodexo. My role is more of is not an operational role, like probably some of the folks on this call where they have an operational responsibility. So I can't comment fully on how it's affecting things. But I think for me, and it's great to see so many people from different organisations working in this manner, is really understanding how it affects perhaps the older buildings as well. So I have experience of working across different types of PFI, so blue light PFI, schools, and I'm currently working on a project for one of our MOD clients where we're collecting all the asset data. Now we're at the back end of that now. And it's obviously looking at well, have we collected the right information in terms of the fire doors to make sure that when we load that into our CAFM system, that everything's there that should be there, so we can recall that information for contractors working on any particular aspect of things to make sure that we have everything we should. So from me, unfortunately, I can't give you an operational standpoint, but I can from an asset management standpoint. It's like just trying to understand. Particularly like for me, for the old buildings, I think we probably have a really good steer for the buildings that are being built now, and the refits perhaps, but making sure that our existing properties are safe, are the way they should be, and making sure that perhaps we apply everything in the right way. That's kind of sort of my kind of standpoint.
That's very helpful. Thank you. I'll come back to Sodexo. Graham Flint's had his hand up very patiently.
Thank you. Yes, Graham Flint. I'm an associate at Arup, working with Dan on the fire side of things. I think I just wanted to build on what Dan was saying. And so, George, thank you for those slides. What you've set out there is very much how we view the world. As a fire engineer, that's the information that I think should be being passed across. Those are all the same questions that we want to ask of our clients to make sure that they understand their responsibilities. Going back to what Dan was saying, I think the technology is there, the capability is there to understand how this information can be structured. There's obviously a bit of a contractual flap that needs to get kind of sorted down. But I think from our point of view, the greatest difficulty we have in actually achieving this is making sure that our clients see the value of us doing this work. Historically and traditionally, we write a PDF report which some people might read, in which we set out the performance requirements and say where we want to get to, and all the stuff that Dan's been working on is providing us with the tools and the understanding and the frameworks and the workflows to enable us to take that information out of orphaned PDF reports that no one ever reads and actually get them back into live shared information. So I think that and the difficulty with doing that is that also our clients are keen. The call comes through. Oh, can you just do a quick light touch fire strategy for this work, please? And a couple of marked up drawings and a couple of bits of text to show the building regulations, and that'll be $5,000, please, or something. And they don't, they're. I think some not for all clients, but there are some clients where the value of actually a bit more investment now gets all this information sorted out up front when it's the best time to do it, and then they have it.
Absolutely. Can I Martin Stewart, do you want to give us the view from Equans?
Yep, sorry, apologies for that.
No worries.
I was on mute. In all honesty, this meeting invite came via our design manager. I don't actually see them in attendance, and our operational manager, but just to give a bit of context as to why it's come over to myself and probably Christine Mills on the call. We currently look after a PFI project social housing PFI project in Leeds, which went through the initial refurb stage. And we're now at obviously the maintenance, the repairs and maintenance and life cycle side of things. So obviously the changes in the Fire Safety Act, we've obviously had to respond to that in terms of fire door checks, provision of information. And at the moment, we're currently trying to gather a greater understanding as to each party's responsibility. So from a client's responsibility in terms of responsible person, the principal designer under the building regulations, not the CDM, who's going to undertake that role effectively. So be open and honest, at the moment we're in those kind of wider discussions that have our design manager input for his knowledge in terms of the wider regulations overview, then myself from a commercial perspective, and obviously our operational team. So there's meetings ongoing at the moment with our client, and I think our client is also it's fair to say it's fairly fresh in terms of the changes in the legislation, and their understanding as to what is required as well. So yeah, my initial thoughts was this was going to be a bit of a this is what we see as coming out in terms of the approach to take in the industry. But yeah, really appreciate what's going on here in terms of the collaboration.
Yeah,
excellent. Thank you.
If I could just sort of just respond to that a little bit, Richard, if I may.
So yeah, absolutely.
Your design manager, I've forgotten his name actually, but he's contacted me and he said he couldn't make it this morning, but he's very keen to know more, and I've sent him some information through. So that's just to let you know, Martin.
Excellent. Yeah.
He's not just not turned up.
No, of course not.
But yeah, the interesting thing at the moment is that the definitions of who's got to do what, and what information's needed. Everybody's been expecting the department or the regulator to provide that information and that clarity, and it will not come through because two reasons really. One is I don't think that they want to leave themselves exposed, and secondly, I don't think they know. The knowledge really comes from the industry, and therefore that's why these workshops are particularly important, because we're the ones that can drive what the requirements are. If they're asking for things that are daft, then that's something that we can practically feedback on. And I was talking with somebody that is managing or was managing a hospital until recently, and he was saying that when they did an inspection of fire dampers, they discovered that literally half of the fire dampers either had never been inspected, or they didn't even, in some cases, know even where they were. And that is, I know from my experience, that's not at all uncommon. Now, we've got people like Paul White on the call. Paul's a specialist in smoke control, and the smoke is obviously one of the things that the regulators are going to be zeroing in on. And the important thing is that it really, really, really isn't just about new build. Yeah, this whole thing is about, because it's under the fire safety order, it applies to all buildings. So I think we're now into a regulated industry, although I'm not sure that most people appreciate that that's the case. So if we can, the fact is that nobody has got good quality information. If the regulator had the resources to actually check everybody, then there'd be huge problems. But the whole point is that we need to put in place something that can then gradually get to where we need to be.
Paul,
Jim.
do you want to just, as an expert in smoke control, want to say a few words?
Yes, I can do. I'm probably even more of an expert in fire dampers and fire safety and ventilation. But yeah, I mean, as George said, unfortunately, there have been a lot of people going around giving people reports saying that their fire dampers are okay, but they've not been looking at the install. They've just been checking that they open and close. But you know, if there's so many things wrong with fire damper installations, I don't know where to start. It's a simple answer. Smoke control. I mean, and I can show you pictures and you laugh, but the problem is I could probably come to any site and find exactly the same thing on any site. The other point is with smoke control systems. Hopefully, people are getting those inspected at least once a year by an independent third party. But when you start to look into it, if you look at BS 9999 or BS 9991, and certainly the new BS 9991, you should be going and looking at the control panels once a week or once a day to see if there's any faults. It's a difficult thing with smoke control systems, although they're called an active system. They're actually passive. They don't do anything until you get an alarm, so you won't see any faults if somebody hasn't triggered them or tried to test them in any way. They just sit there, and of course there's so many more components in the smoke control system. So yes, if it really comes down to records that say everything is all right, it's just as good as records that say something's wrong, because it does show evidence that you're going and looking at it. And certainly we still await the Grenfell Tower report on smoke control. I've been waiting for it. It was supposed to come out before Christmas. It was supposed to come out after Christmas. I suspect it's going to be such a mess that that's why it's being delayed.
Well, something that keeps coming up in all our meetings is competence and what we can do about it. Once you've defined it, of course. Well, I think it's not limited just to the industry, is it, Paul? Can I call Graham? You've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you. It was just to go back to that point that George made, I think, a bit earlier, which was about whether, you know, what the regulator is kind of expecting and expect an understanding of the things. And I think the point I just wanted to make is that the legal requirement is to take all reasonable steps. And where we are just now is that it's certainly for existing buildings. It's not clear yet what reasonable counts as. There is a massive lack of information, but equally, you know, the requirements of the Building Safety Act aren't actually anything new. It's been in the RRO since 2005 to have all this information. So, you know, the building, in my view, the Building Safety Act is an enforcement of things which is an enhancement of requirements that were already there. And all of a sudden, everyone's kind of scrambling, or building owners are scrambling around trying to find all this information that they already had. So I think, you know, this view of what is reasonable to get does need to be viewed in the light of, well, what information actually should have been made available already. Yeah, and I do think all building owners do need to do quite a bit of catch up. And I think there will be some things that it's not really feasible to try and understand. You know, things that you have to deconstruct big chunks of the building to try and find out exactly what's there. But there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. You know, doing cause and effect testing. You know, just, you know, check when you get works done, making sure that the certs do get added into the building manual, that kind of thing. There is an awful lot of easy stuff. I think it's just the building owners, it's not been a high priority yet, and all of a sudden it will be.
Yeah, it's that's
or it is now,
shouldn't it, by now?
Yeah.
Right, George, can I just interrupt? George, could you cut and paste your questions into my Skype, please?
Yes, I will. Could I just ask a question? Could I jump in and just ask a question of Graham there, just to build on what he was saying? And that is that one of the things that Graham has just said, which is what I believe, is the ultimate responsibility on having the information, the right information, rests with the client. Now, one of the challenges, obviously, that people like Sodexo and Equans and others have got, is that if they've been looking after the building for 10 years, the client may come back and say, well, why don't you already have that information? Now, the fact is, in most cases, it was never provided because O&M information is normally so poor anyway. And therefore, to some extent, what I'm hoping that we could, perhaps do collaboratively is come up with a way that we can help health trusts, for example, get to a situation where they do have the right information, because otherwise we're not going to make any progress. Under the new legislation, the other major thing is that you can't transfer risk. Now, they used to be able to transfer the risk down to the SPV or down to the FM, but that's no longer an option. So I'm not suggesting that we because clearly it's a difficult question for an FM to ask or an SPV to ask, because you could be opening yourself up to a major claim. But this is now the law, and therefore, if people aren't complying with it, then that's an issue. Anyway,
right, Daniel, you had your hand up, but you put it down. Did you give up?
No, no. It's I guess again, it's just building on something Graham was saying. In that now people are kind of scrabbling to find information. And I can't help but think about how the entire 19650 series is pretty client driven, and rightly so, because they're the owners of all this information. And it's kind of got me. It got me wondering though, because I'm not really on the operational side of things. I don't kind of go into that too much. But it's got me kind of wondering if part 3, which is BIM in the operational stage, needs to be kind of pushed more, because I think a lot of the buildings that we are kind of seeing issues with, they're already in operation. And so I wonder if that's something we could kind of push and kind of get people thinking about that information model as a single thing, if that would kind of if that would help some of this, go some way to helping it.
Paul, do you want to come in on that? You got your hand up?
Not specifically on that last point. I mean, I think the issues that if they're residential buildings, ventilation obviously isn't that concerning, but I mean, I can just give a couple of examples where people have basically, with a smoke control system, have played with it and changed it. Now, the issue with that is that somebody's done some design work, and this sort of thing is worrying me, because if you've simply just replaced like for like, and then the trouble is, I'm talking about buildings that were completed in the 80s, and I don't quite know. All I can say is that well, if you've changed that and you've changed it that component for something new, and it works in a slightly different way, albeit probably safer, but I can't. In fact, the one I'm talking about was safer from the fact that people wouldn't fall out the building when they were trying to reset them. Is that, in theory, you've not replaced like for like. You've just changed an actuator. Instead of it just being a magnet that allowed something to spring open, you've now put a drive open, drive closed actuator on it. You've integrated it with the system, and for all the right reasons. But if you look at it now, if you should probably replace the whole thing. Now that, of course, sounds. So this is the thing. So many people have done stuff for the right reasons, but have probably ended up with the wrong result because they've now taken a design decision. I mean, fundamentally, also looking at a particular building, I'm fairly certain it should have had a stair top vent as well as vents on the floors. That's not even there. I don't even know whether they could put it in. But
as you say, that's their design decisions, aren't they?
Yes, and these are
And
all
that
design
feeds
decisions.
perfectly into the next question, which is who is the responsible person?
Yes. Now, and I can't see that in this situation at the moment. That the problem is I've now told somebody about this. So this is there in the background. You know, it's in emails, it's in reports.
Yeah.
You going ahead and I found this out of Grenfell. An email that I'd sent in 2009 turned up in the Grenfell evidence in 2019. I don't even work for that company anymore. Yeah. And nothing disappears anymore. So it's really, you know, you do need to be careful what you do. Now, as it happens, I can't afford the insurance to do design, but obviously I know design. And I've sort of had to say, well, you've got to go and get a company with design PI to come and look at this.
Yeah.
And tell you how they're going to refurbish it. And
right, we're going to make this a quick fire round. Who is the responsible person? Jim Watts.
In brief, we all are. So I feel like the enemy on this call. I come from a contracting background, so I'm a builder, not part of the FM fraternity. The reason I accepted the call.
That's okay. That part very much part of what we. Sorry to interrupt you. BIM for Housing does. It's not just, we don't want everything in a silo. Yeah. So we like people from the all stakeholders to contribute, because they've often got a different perspective. So you carry on, Jim.
So fair play. I mean, the reason I took the call is because actually a large part of our business is in the FM world, and they're always bitching at me that I don't understand. So I thought I'd get a bit of background in independent information by coming on the call. So I'm an operations director. I work with the Waits Group. I'm part of the building safety team, which is born out of things that have come to light since Grenfell, and I'm also part of the team preparing our business for the implications of the Building Safety Act. In short, you know, I think the phrase somebody used earlier was good. You know, we're a regulated industry now. So all of a sudden, you know, we're all responsible persons. Responsible for whether that's responsible for saying no, I'm not qualified to make that judgment, as we just heard earlier, or whether it's in mandatory recurrence reporting, or you know, just being professional in what we're doing.
Absolutely. James Reed, who's the responsible person?
I think I agree with Jim. It's everybody, and the answer to those questions will be opined upon by the courts. You know, I think it's a really important this sort of working group, and thank you, George, for the invitation. You know, my world is about risk, legal risk, insurable risk, investor risk, and you know, I've been taking some notes about all of the different stakeholders and their comments, and you know, things like things like regulation, things like responsibility, processing, data retention, data capture, definitions, dictionary. This is all about information and having joined up conversations between those that have the money and those that want to spend the money and those that are going to eventually take hold of the risk. And I think the difficulty is the education piece that you were talking about for clients, understanding that is a body of work, and you know, as I'm poacher turned gamekeeper, trying to keep it out of the hands of lawyers, and having, you know, and setting an agenda that the industry can dictate their own playbook or have their own dictionary definitions that everybody agrees with, because terms of art are very important, and this is a multidisciplinary solution. So we need to work together in order to find that commonality, so that lawyers are not picking over you know, definitions that disciplines have different views on.
Yeah, That's a really, really good point. Really, really good. Very relevant. Okay, Graham.
Yeah, I think it's actually just to speak to what James said, and going back maybe back to what Jim said, who is the responsible person? Well, that's a legally defined term. So everyone is not actually a responsible person, but we all do have duties in terms of information management. That goes back to that definitions thing. But it is really important to be very clear, who is the responsible person. It's whoever has the control over that part of the building. They are responsible for the information in that area, and they have to coordinate with all of the other responsible persons who are employers, who are other organizations who have control of different parts of the building. I think that's the there was a point made earlier that certain buildings have got 3 different risk assessments done by different people for different organizations. Like, well, maybe, and that's borne out of probably the way contracts are currently written. Maybe more focus needs to be given to Article 22 of the RRO that says all responsible persons need to cooperate and coordinate. At which point you don't end up with multiple risk assessments. You end up with a coordinating body between the different responsible persons, and one risk assessment gets done that addresses all the different areas. And that's where I think the safety case is leading us, because the safety case for certain buildings, has the principal accountable person put at the top deliberately. So there is one party who does actually have to push through that coordination. There's an expectation that it's not just a case of coordination. They need, they're legally obligated to get information from other parties, other stakeholders, other duty holders in the building, and synthesize all that information together and come up with their argument that says that, yeah, this building, all reasonable steps have been taken for safety in this building.
Yeah, absolutely. Alan Oliver.
Yeah, I wanted to sort of agree with what's just been said in that I think the responsible person, if you're looking at a hospital trust, it's probably the CEO. I think the idea that there's like 627 responsible persons within a hospital trust just completely muddies the water. I think if the CEO was to be told that he has the ultimate power and responsibility in the budget, I think that would be a wake-up call. I think, from my experience, I think there's a lot of senior managers in hospitals who think they've got a fire department who take the responsibility, but they don't have the budget. And very often they're reporting to an estates director who tells them that there's no money for it and things like that. So I think it's a very straightforward thing. The responsible person is the CEO, unless he can prove us otherwise, or he or she can prove otherwise.
Yeah, good. That's very good, very clear. And I think you're right, actually, aren't you? Because it is defined in law, isn't it? Paul White.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right in terms of that. That can be an organisation, not an individual, but that organisation then has to define their authorised person, because then that's the key point. But again, authorised persons have to have, as Alan says, access to budgets, because this isn't going to be cheap. I can't. It's even the bits that I see are not good. I mean, I offer opinion reports to try and help people out to solve these issues, to highlight what issues I think they have. I can't solve the issues for them, and I see myself as a duty holder. So, as Jim says, different people can be different responsible persons throughout the design and the construction and the when the building's occupied. But when somebody's coming in and giving you a report that they've done for you on certain things like fire stopping, dampers, smoke control system, they become a duty holder. And because we all live in a contractual world, and if you give somebody bad news, they tend not to use you again, even though they're trying to help you. As a duty holder, there's some also discussion about at which point do you have to tell somebody what you found. So also be aware of that. So as for instance, if you did a fire damper inspection, the suggestion's been made that 11 months later you say, are we coming to inspect them again? Have you done any work on what we've done? and if we don't get the contract, we feel that we're duty bound to actually tell somebody what we found last time, to see if anything's been done about it. And I also, I mean, somebody was talking about risk. In everything I do, I keep telling people to say and make sure that your authorised person passes this on to your risk assessor, because the clue's in the name. However, I'm not convinced that risk assessors have got the experience in the areas that I work in.
What so what is that responsible person actually responsible for? What does that mean?
Well, that's defined in law as so the responsible person isn't an individual and can be a company. The authorised person represents as a name the responsible person, which, as I say, might be a company or might be it might be a person. So I think somebody said the CEO. Well, that's right. So,
but what are they responsible for? What are they responsible for? So I'm saying they're responsible for what? What are they responsible for?
For the fire safety of the building. I mean, it really is quite that serious.
Anybody else want to come in on that?
I mean, there's 15 specific fire safety duties and other things that they're responsible for. I mean, this is if we're into legal definitions of what the responsible person is responsible for, you need to go and read the RRO, the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order, because that sets that out. And then you've got the principal accountable person and the accountable person under the Building Safety Act, who have similar but not exactly the same. The duties are not the same. And again, I think where this leads, though, is that a lot of the Building Safety Act and a lot of the RRO is intended to make sure that people who have the information and who have the control of the areas are talking to each other. You know, the idea is not that things can be, you can't. It's not feasible to retrofit sprinklers in every single building, for example. But however, the different people who have different control, who have the lived-in knowledge of the building, are supposed to be communicating reasonably regularly to make sure that there's not some sort of outlandish risk that's that's likely to appear to the occupants. It's where a lot of refurbishments go wrong. In the things happen and information on the building doesn't get updated, doesn't get passed to people who know about, say, who the vulnerable people in the building are, and therefore those people are at an elevated risk. I mean, speaking to Paul's point earlier, I also recently had a building where shortly after, it was originally it's a natural smoke ventilation system, but it was upgraded to become a combined smoke ventilation system and environmental ventilation system, but the dampers weren't upgraded. So therefore, all of a sudden, the change means that it's not the system is effectively not certified anymore, and there are consequences of that that need to be recorded in the risk assessment, and the building needs to be operated slightly differently. So yeah, it is important to know.
George.
Yeah, I think one of the key things that I think most people still haven't got their heads around is that this isn't something that you can transfer on to a specialist and they take on the liability for it. The responsible person needs to be aware of what that doesn't mean that the chief exec has got to really understand about, smoke control and things like that, but they're ultimately responsible for ensuring that the people that they put in place are adequately informed, that they've got the right information to be able to make the right decisions. And that comes back to the O&Ms, and also that they're suitably experienced in doing the work, and also they provide the information at the end of it, which feeds back into the golden thread. So it's this thing that you can no longer, under law, you can no longer transfer risk. That's my understanding of that's what's been hammered home to me.
Jim, you had your hand up, you put it down. You had your hand up, you put it down.
Yeah, well,
you dancing there, or what's going on?
Well, yeah, I'll do a bit of that. I'm a contractor, so that's what we do. No, I kind of put it down because the conversation moved on. I think the point I wanted to make was the Building Safety Act isn't all about fire. No, I absolutely agree.
Yeah,
I agree in the world of ductwork, and when it comes to fire dampers, I feel your pain. There are some disadvantages of working for a contractor who's been around for 126 years.
Yeah,
that's a lot of legacy. But yeah, so I think that the point there was that we mustn't lose sight of the fact that it isn't all about fires.
Absolutely. I think that's thank you. Okay, let's just move on a little bit and look at, right, okay, so we've got the responsible person. What information do they need to provide? What do they need to provide, and where do they get it from? George, give us a start.
Well, I think that needs to come from on an existing building. So coming back to what Caroline was saying earlier, I think on an existing building, that needs to come from record information. And if the record information, which is often the case, is incomplete, then there needs to be a course of action to actually get it to be complete. And that doesn't mean it needs to be done. Yeah, one of the things we've experienced is that people will collect information for a purpose, and then somebody else will collect almost the same information because they've not been connected up, they've not been joined up. And we're seeing this currently because of the Building Safety Act and then fire safety, and then people are then looking at things from a carbon perspective because there's remedial works and things like that. What I think needs to happen is that that's got to be coordinated and joined up. Yeah, so
so it's not just about having the information, it's about making sure it's not duplicate.
Yeah, really you need it's the whole common single version of the truth, as it were. It doesn't have to all be in one system, but there needs to be some sort of structure in terms
it needs to feed into each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, Daniel.
Yeah, obviously my opinion is a little bit biased on this. But there you go. But I mean, the information. I mean, primarily in terms of what's out there, it should be coming from your golden thread, you know, which is your digital repository of information. Now, 19650 isn't mentioned by name in the golden thread, but if you haven't already, what I would do is go and read that golden thread thing. Take you about half an hour. And then have a read of 19650 Part 1. And it is shocking how similar what's being asked for in that golden thread comes across in 19650. In terms of getting more specific, that information should be coming from either an archive, hopefully not, but if we need to pull up something for legal reasons, that should be coming from an archive state of that information. It should be coming from common data environment, and in getting more specific still, when new works are started, whether or not that's on an existing building is kind of doesn't really matter very much, but that information should be provided as part of the reference material to whoever's doing those works, and that could be works to do with maintenance and to do with new parts of the building or whatever. Part 3 and Part 2 both equally apply in that regard. So I think what I'm saying is that I feel that there is a pretty good answer to this out there already if you link up golden thread legislation with 19650 Part 2 and 3 in terms of where we ought to be storing this, how it should be stored, how it should be linked up and things. Because then, by following these principles, you do avoid that duplication of information or unnecessary duplication of information.
Okay, fair enough. And Alan Oliver.
Yes, thanks, Richard. By the way, just introduce myself to everyone. Because I don't think most people know me here. I'm a director of a company called Golden Thread Fire Delay. And what I'd like to do, Richard, is link two things that have been said today with the reference documents. If
please do. I wanted you to actually. I mentioned at the beginning. I would like you to show that.
The two phrases I'd like to sort of link together, and then then introduce the reference document. The first phrase is people are scrabbling for information. and obviously that's because there's incomplete O&Ms. We all know that. And people are saying, like, you know, if a building is 50 years old, what do you do? Well, you know, what do you do if the building's 5 years old, especially if it's related to things like fire doors that might have been the wrong specification, they might have been bashed around, and you know, maybe people have removed them or changed them or heaven knows what else. So that's the first thing. The second one is that the knowledge should come from the industry. And it was on that basis, because that's what Dame Judith Hackett said in her report on Grenfell Tower, wasn't it? That, you know, the industry shouldn't be waiting for people to tell them what to do. They should be just getting in there, rolling up their sleeves and getting on with it and finding out the solutions and imparting the knowledge. So, as you know, Richard, it was on that basis that I spoke to the principal fire engineer of the NHS in 2018, a guy called Mike Ralph. And I said to him, how is it that the NHS, which is arguably the biggest owners of fire doors in Europe, don't have standardised systems for inspecting them? And he sort of took it on the chin and said, well, we don't have standardised systems for fire risk assessing our buildings, but if you'd like to write a paper on how to do it, why don't you join NAFO, the National Association of Healthcare Fire Officers, set up a working group and write a paper on how to do it? So as you know, that's what I did from January 2019. And we created a paper on how to inspect fire doors in the NHS. We then turned it into a reference document. I'm currently writing working on the 3rd edition of this reference document. And as you very well know, Richard, just about the whole of last year, BIM for Housing were working on adapting this for residential buildings. And I'm pleased to say that that's now signed off and about to be printed. And at the same time, we set up another NAFO working group on how to inspect fire dampers, fire stopping and cavity barriers. And I'm pleased to say that that's now been signed off and that's about to be printed as well. So the information is out there. Now just to quickly explain, we said that there's 3 different ways of inspecting fire separation elements, fire compartmentation elements, whether it be fire doors, fire dampers, fire stopping and cavity barriers. You need a type 1 inspection for a brand new building and a brand new installation where you've got this golden thread of information and you should be able to match up what's been installed with what's been specified and fire tested, and then make sure that there is this golden thread of information. But if it's an existing building where this golden thread of information doesn't exist, you've got to have someone competent to do so, to inspect these elements, not in terms of if they're perfect, because they're unlikely to be perfect in a 20-year-old building if it's a fire door, but whether it's suitable and sufficient for its location. So rather than focusing on the building regulations, you focus on the fire safety order and the requirement. Is it suitable and sufficient to protect relevant people and to ensure that they're safe and they can evacuate the building? So, and then a third type of inspection, a type 3 inspection, is for a fire compartment element, such as a fire door or a fire damper, that has either already been type 1 or type 2 inspected. You then type 3 inspect them in terms of functional ongoing PPM maintenance. So I would suggest for people who say they're scrabbling around for information in an existing building, if it's more than a few years old, I wouldn't even bother looking for the O&M manual. I'd get somebody in to inspect it competently and create a new golden thread of information, and then you can move forward with it.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, very, very good point. Very good point. Caroline.
Yeah, it was just a point around the data element of it, and from certainly from my experience working with Sodexo, and I don't know if Martin's had or his teams have had the same issue, is we work with different organisations, and our primary contract maybe with the FM team, but then the estates team goes in and does a whole load of work on a building, on a part of a building, doesn't tell anybody that they've done it, not even their own FM team. And then we go along the next time and there's a whole different set of, the building's completely changed. So then, it's where those responsibilities is like. So sometimes within an organisation that our client is, they don't talk to each other, and then we have to come along and try and fix everything. and redo all the information on that side of things. So yeah, that's challenges that we've had certainly in the past. Is estates teams will come in, completely gut a building, redo it, and then say, oh, by the way, yeah, we've done this, not give anybody any information. Then you've got to go in and redo fire risk assessments because they've changed the structure of a building. They've added new assets in. So yeah, it was just that sometimes that's where it lies. So we think we've got a great piece of information, and all of a sudden somebody else comes in, and we don't find out till somebody's probably 6-12 months later when we've gone in and our suppliers have gone in and done a maintenance on part of the building.
Well, hopefully that's what this new legislation is going to impact on.
Well, yeah, hopefully, but it's probably sometimes it's the clients understanding their responsibilities and getting those two parts of the same organisation, particularly with the larger the organisation is, to talk to each other, make sure that when they're making these decisions, they involve the FM teams as well to make sure everything goes forward the way it should, not just, oh yeah, well, it's in our plan to do this. We've gone in, we've done it, tick, it's all yours now.
The experience that we have with
silos, eh?
I totally agree with what you're saying there, Caroline, in terms of in that approach. I mean, we've been quite lucky in a sense in the context of what we're doing. It's quite close knit and quite limited in terms of the scope of the buildings, but just that communication and detail being discussed between parties for third parties entering buildings that we've got FM obligations for. So, for instance, statutory authority works, BT, fibre installations within high-rise buildings, in social housing, obviously breaching compartmentation, rectifying that. All that information needs to be passed through to us in terms of the remedial works that have taken place. But we're quite lucky in that we are in that position where we have come up across a few barriers to get that information, but we are now in a position where we have that level of communication because of the context of it. It's quite small in the nature of it. We're not looking after vast estates here, there and everywhere as such. But again, sprinkler installations that are being undertaken by third party, not part of our FM obligation under our original refurbishment, but now being delivered. Obviously, again, any breaches, any fire changes to the structure, all that information and record keeping needs to come through to us as an FM contractor, so that we've got that information as well to work with.
Okay, I'll come to you, Graham. Can I just Kieran Downs, you've been silent. Can I pick on you?
If you want to, yeah, that's fine. I think I could probably build on what Caroline and Martin are saying. And throughout I've been on a few sides of the fence. I've worked for principal contractors. I've worked in housing association, new build development, and now I'm sort of leading things with surveying at Sodexo now, so in asset management, just briefly. But essentially, there's definitely a lack in an understanding and across the industry, and it's very difficult to obtain documentation, sign-offs when I've seen it through new builds, refurbishments, any stage of any construction. Getting the information and holding a liability over a party is really difficult. I've seen contractors take fines over instead of handing over documentations, providing O&M information as a preference. I've seen all sorts of difficulties to make new contracts difficult to set up, where documents won't be handed over, things go missing. And I think, to go back to what Alan was saying, the approach is probably to create a new golden thread of information, but where does that get funded from? And there's situations where you may be operating in a building, somebody else has the freehold. Who is the RP? Is it the operator? Is there a joint responsibility there as well? There's difficult conversations around who's going to fund obtaining new golden thread. So there's a few of my views on that side of things.
No, thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry, I will come back to the people with hands raised. I just want to bring in a couple of people who haven't actually said anything yet. Christine Mills.
I think she's not on the call anymore.
She's not here. All right, then I will go back to the hands. Graham.
Yeah, thank you. I was just speaking to, I think, what's happened before. It's really boring, but actually I think a lot of this starts from clients actually having a strategy, you know, either a building safety strategy or a fire safety strategy or a fire safety management strategy, because that's where you set out what are our objectives, what are the components in the building that need to be checked, who's responsible for them. When we bring in contractors, what does the contract need to say? Because I think that there's a few things that have been mentioned just there about yeah, whose responsibility is to get this information. It's like, well, people who are responsible persons legally, people who are principal accountable persons need to be writing their contracts with their appointees in such a way that they can, you know, they can contractually demand the information that they need. And I think up until now, it's all been very ad hoc. It's all been, yeah, well, you're doing this, and therefore we'll get this O&M, and then someone has to try and comb their way through the O&M to see whether or not it's got the information they need. Whereas it should be the other way around. It should be the asset owner or the asset duty holder should say, right, this is the asset. Here are my legal obligations. Here are the systems that need to be maintained. Here's the information I need, and therefore this is what I need to ask for from my suppliers, so that
Absolutely. Well,
Equans
a
and
lot of the work
Sodexo
we've been
don't
doing
get landed
actually,
with an unknown thing of, oh, well, we're not quite sure what information we need to provide, and someone will get angry when we don't give it.
a lot of the work we've been doing in BIM for housing actually over the last couple of years is to identify what the different stakeholders actually need. What do you actually need? What should you have to fulfill your function legally?
I mean, I would point to George had a great list and a great framework. So I mean, you know, that information exists, and it's not, you know, it's not rocket science. It's like it's identifying what are the key, what are the protection measures you're relying on.
Well,
no, it is.
Alan.
Yes, thanks, Richard. Just wanting to come back on a point that Kieran made about the fact that creating a new golden thread of information might be expensive and unaffordable. If you've got the sort of building I looked at last week, an 18-story hall of residence where none of the doors are fire compliant, and they've got to submit a building safety case, clearly they've got to do something about it. And I'm not talking of creating a new golden thread of information just for the sake of it, but clearly what you would do is you'd rectify all the fire doors that are critical to a minimum standard to comply with the legal requirement of the fire safety order, that you've got suitable and sufficient fire compartments in place. And you then, as part of that, create a new golden thread of information based on that. So it shouldn't cost any more money than the minimum legal requirement to keep people safe in buildings.
I think it's more about upskilling those responsible persons in a lot of situations to be on the ball about actually, and like Graham's saying, having that strategy in place in the first place. I've seen a lot of places that it doesn't exist. So it becomes a bit of a reactive situation without a strategy where you're having to upskill, and maybe people didn't know what to ask for in the first place. So it could have been missed from contractual obligations. But there's, yeah, I definitely see like a gap in knowledge and this kind of information just falls through the net all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people have got to risk manage their buildings, and if the person responsible for risk managing the building says that they need something, they need to do it. And I think the new legislation means that people can't just sit on it and do nothing year after year, because that's yes. gonna hang them legally, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Paul White.
Yeah, I mean, I think the difficult bit, and I think somebody said it a bit earlier, is one of the key things that you have to find out is what the hell the fire strategy was in the first place. Because, I mean, for instance, I quite often see fire strategies which say, oh, we know that this is supposed to be a maximum 7.5 meters for this escape distance, but we got a couple that are 9, that'll be all right. And unfortunately, that's written in the fire strategy. Now, if you were to get somebody to provide you with a new fire strategy, they might look at it and just say, well, this isn't right. And then what do you do about that? And it becomes, and then so therefore this trail of design and responsibility And even that worries me now, because a lot of these are design and build contracts. So, and I've sat in meetings where the contractor has been speaking to the consultant and saying, well, we don't think this is right. And the consultant has just said, well, it's your design now, you do what you want. And some of these, so even on new builds, the contractual path is so convoluted and pushing everything down to the bottom of the heap that you're still ending up with people who are doing stuff that they don't really know what they're doing, or they're accepting a fire strategy that they haven't actually commissioned. And these things kind of worry me, but there's not a lot I can do about it.
George.
Yeah, just building on what Kieran was saying there, one of the big challenges, I think, is educating client organisations to their responsibilities, and more importantly, giving them an easy way to address them. Because at the moment, I think in most cases, they're overwhelmed. So part of the objective, I think, that if you find that this group's been worthwhile, I mean, hopefully you found it interesting today. What we'd like to do is set up some more sessions to follow on from this, because I think if we can come up with something that is, it's not coming from, Sodexo or Waits or Equans to the client. It's actually coming from a collection of industry professionals that are saying to clients, this is what you're now responsible for, and this is how you can get there. And I've been discussing with Richard what we'll perhaps do is look at, because the BIM for housing presence is very powerful, because we've got a fantastic community, but it's a bit distracting as well, because if you go and talk to a health trust, well, who have BIM for housing? So what we're probably going to do is set up something called BIM for assets, because that's then, if you like, generic, and we can then it's another way of presenting it, if that's okay.
Well, it's across the industry, isn't it? This is the point. And we've got over getting on for 1,500 active members now, and many of them work across the whole industry, not just in the housing sector. So we're kind of wasting that resource to some extent at the moment.
Exactly.
Paul.
Firstly, yes, George, I think that's a really good idea, because I have to say, even though I've been looking at it as BIM for housing, I've always been looking at it as BIM for everything. I mean, the other point that I have to make is that I go and give people opinions, and I'll go round and I'll have a client, but there's 2 or 3 things here. Is this that I'm trying to protect everybody. So when I look at it, I'm looking at the people who are obviously occupants of the building, because they don't know anything about any of this, so therefore they are the completely innocent people. But if I give an opinion, I'm also trying to protect the company, my client, so that they don't fall foul of the law in any way, and that they can do that. And then I'm also looking at the fact that you've got the individuals who are doing some of this stuff, and they need a level of protection if they're going around and inspecting things. But if we lose a business, then we put a load of people out on the streets. So this whole thing really ties together in quite a social way, in the fact that if you leave your organisation open, then you're putting your employees at risk, because they may not have a job tomorrow. And we haven't seen any litigation yet. But if there is litigation, it ain't going to be cheap.
Yeah, so, very much so. In all ways, not just financial.
Yes.
Graham.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to make the point. Obviously, there's been some good discussion here. In the interests of common data environments and things, other organisations are looking at similar things. I think it's just to make sure that if this is a forum to be taken forward and expanded and to produce industry guidance, that it's not contradictory or in too much competition with others like FIA, ASFP, IFE. They've all got kind of committees looking at this kind of thing.
Absolutely.
To make sure that's
we had those discussions in the early days of George's chairmanship at BIM for Housing. George, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, we're working with. Are you talking about different CDEs, or are you talking about different organisations that are promoting CDEs?
It's the latter. It's just to make sure that if there is a difference or a conflict or something, so because there are now a number of different groups who are focusing on this same problem. I think LEBA's probably got its own working group that looking at it from the architectural point of view. It's going back to the Building Safety Act and the RRO. It's this idea about cooperation and coordination. If the industry is creating a position, ideally it's a collaborative position that the key stakeholders have agreed on, as opposed to having 3 or 4 different versions of the same thing that no one necessarily knows which one should take primacy.
Well, we're part of NEMA, so on the BIM side, we're very engaged with what other people are doing as well. So I don't think there's anything that's contradictory on that, Graham. No, but you're quite right that we have to ensure that there's one message, as it were.
Okay, we've got about a minute left now. Anybody else got anything very quick they want to say? Okay, cool. Well, George, so next steps.
I think let's have a follow-up. We'll try and put a little. It's been. I think we've now got the basis of a discussion to go forward. And Jim, you can learn a bit more about asset management.
Great. Then thank you for coming, and good to see you. Hope to see you very soon. We'll be in touch very soon with the video and the high points and a date for moving this forward. If anybody's got any ideas or anything they particularly want to cover in a meeting, send those through to us, and we'll certainly bear those in mind.
Jim, Paula Chandler has been a tremendous contributor to us, by the way. So
massively.
Just to let you know.
Yeah, I know Paula very well.
Yeah,
cool.
Good.
We'll tell her she was mentioned.
I will.
Okay, guys. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
See you.
Thanks, George. Bye, everybody.